let's start with a centering breath. So everyone find your feet, roll your shoulders back for a moment, and pause. Just checking in, noticing where you are today. So much has been going on. And so in these crazy times, we often don't take a moment just for a breath, just for a second of quiet. So as you're here, just notice where you are this morning. Notice what your needs are. Let's take 3 more breaths together. Excellent. Excellent. So I am so excited to welcome our guests this morning. We have a fabulous panel with us this week. We're starting with my dear friend and colleague, Kate Mitchell Alfonzo. Kate Alfonzo has been a part of our Mindful Practices family for what? I think it's been the past 5-6 years. Kate has been an educator, an instructional coach, and a school leader. Kate's family was also touched by COVID, and she's going to share that story. I really encourage us as we're here today to add questions to the chat. We're framing Kate's story around thinking, what could schools do? How can schools support families when we're thinking about meaningful closure and when we're thinking about going back to school in the fall? And so, Kate, we're going to start our panel today by just asking you to share your journey. And first off, I want to say how amazingly brave you are, my friend, for saying, I'm going to hop on a town hall with folks and I'm going to tell them what this journey looked like, what this journey felt like for me as a mother, for me as an educator. And you're so brave, and I just want to say that out loud and own that. So Kate, you have a biracial and bicultural family, and I think that's also important because we have many folks and friends and families with us who English might not be their first language, and families are struggling with how to read information that are provided from them from schools or the CDC, et cetera. And so I love that you can also share some of that experience with us for folks that might be ELL or ESL learners with us today. So Kate, let's just start with, what was this process and what was this experience like? How did it start, and what did it look like and feel like at the onset?
Sure. Well, hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. And Carla, thanks for the warm welcome. It's my pleasure to be here, especially now that we're overall feeling better, which is a gift in itself, for sure, because these are tough times. So our COVID journey, right, if I want to call it that, but it certainly has been that. It started when a cousin that we live with, she started having symptoms on March 16th, and it was super mild. I remember this was just about when social distancing was kicking off. People were definitely being cautious. The news was starting about to really, really just be careful and watch everything. And she said, I'm going to run to Costco with abuelo, con mi tío, with my uncle. And I said, but she said, I'm not feeling very good. She said, last night I just feel a little off. And I said, let's take your temperature. And honestly, I'm so glad that we did. It's those small things that I think in regular times, and I hear this from so many people, is, oh, I just thought I had a cold, or it was so minor, it was so mild. So we took her temperature. It was a low grade fever, maybe 99.5. And I said, you know what? Why don't you just go downstairs? And she did. And she was in quarantine for a week. And she had only a day and a half of some really mild symptoms. She had some muscle cramps. She had a headache. She did not have a cough. And again, she didn't have a high fever, but she was just off enough to say something is strange. And this is sometimes the benefit of having a large family. So my husband and I, we have 3 children, ages 10, 5, and 3. But we also have his dad, so abuelo. We have grandpa staying with us, and we have an uncle that just happened to be visiting. He lives in Venezuela, but he was visiting family in Georgia, and he just happened to be staying with us. Some people might say wrong place, wrong time. And so luckily, though, when my husband and I started feeling symptoms, which was a week later, so about March 23rd, my husband's came on that Friday evening, and he just felt a little off. He had a cough, and then the next morning he felt a little strange, and I was feeling a little off too. And then by that Sunday morning, maybe that's March 23rd, we quarantined because we just said this feels like it's just not right, knowing everything that was going around. So luckily our cousin came out of quarantine. She was able to help with the kids as well as with our uncle and grandpa. My husband and I quarantined for 5 days in our bedroom. At that time, we were able to make some doctor calls. And this is, I am immunocompromised. So I called my doctor thinking that, you know, for sure I'd be able to get a test. But that's actually not what allowed me to get a test. It's the fact that I am still nursing my daughter, which is really fascinating. And I haven't shared that yet on social media. It wasn't the fact that I have an autoimmune condition, which is really interesting. So I was able to go in and get the drive-by test, which you probably have heard by now. You know, they do a nasal swab and everything like that. And I got my results 5 days later, stating that I was positive. And the information that was shared is and this is really important, I think, for families, is if one person is positive in a home, you're going to want to assume that everybody is sick, just because it's so contagious and it's really hard, no matter how much you're practicing. Just disinfecting, which by the way we were, right? I mean, in these days and times, we were already disinfecting everything, and we were being so careful. And nobody knew anyone that traveled out of the country. We were thinking that my cousin most likely was exposed on the bus. She takes the bus to work.
Uh,
And so, other than that, we didn't have a contact, and nobody at her work was ill. And so there wasn't a restaurant link there, which we initially thought. So I'm not sure how much you want me to go into symptoms, but I think what I can say is within a family of 8, all of us were sick, and our symptoms all looked very different, but there were similarities. Do you want me to speak a little bit about the symptoms?
I think if you want to talk a little bit, for sure. I think that there's many. We've received a ton of questions, Kate, from folks who've emailed
Yep.
in, and folks overwhelmingly are curious about like who went to the hospital and what happened. And
Hmm.
thinking about, when we think about this, and with your educator hat on and your school leader hat on, the social emotional learning needs of your kiddos at home, and
Yep.
how, and you're so, like, Kate, knowing you so long, like, you live your life in the social emotional, like, you're always like the most thoughtful person at the dinner party, the most thoughtful. So I know that this was top of mind for you, and it must have also been really hard for you because you are so present around the emotional needs of your kids. And so, kind of like, what happened when hospital was needed, and then how did you also support the kids? Like, what truths did you share? What did you think was too heavy to share? If and again, at any point, Kate, I want to invite you, and I know I speak for our viewers when I say, if you're like, you know what, you guys, I need a minute, or Kill June, it's time for you to talk a little bit, because again, you're sharing, you're sharing from the heart, you're sharing unscripted. And so if you ever like, yeah, I need a sip of coffee, everybody, please take that moment, Kate. we're all
Thanks.
we're all here with you, and we're grateful that you're just taking the time to talk. And
Yeah, no, thanks. Yeah, absolutely. I guess just I think the part that's been confusing, you guys might have seen this, that they added 6 new symptoms to COVID. I have all of them. And it made me realize that, again, right, we're learning so much about this disease, or sorry, about this virus day by day. And what doctors thought they had at least, sort of the common knowledge around that's now being turned on its head. There are still those, sort of common factors. And so my husband, um, was went to the hospital. The first person to go was actually uh, my uncle, my husband's uncle. And the strangest part was we heard him cough for quite a while. We heard him cough for about a week, and he just did not seem well. But as people can sometimes do, he was a little resistant. A little resistant to, I think, just wanting care, wanting to, sort of think that something might be wrong, which, I'm sure that several families out there might be dealing with. It's hard sometimes, especially with a new virus that people don't know that much about. So, but finally we just said, Tio, we need to take your temperature. And it was 104, and he didn't even feel like he had a fever. He said, I don't feel hot. I don't feel like I have a temperature at all. And we even had to take it with 3 different thermometers to show that, like, it for ourselves as well, because
Right.
we listened to him. He said, I don't feel that bad. I just have a cough. He said, it must be él pensó que algo de aire, like he thought it was something in the air. He said it's just dusty, it's allergies, which so many people are confusing, their symptoms with, for valid reasons. But when we saw the temperature that high, and his cough, we just said we need to take him in. My husband was advised when he first got a chest X-ray, and he was sent home because they said your oxygen looks well, your breathing is fine, there's no signs of pneumonia in your lungs. When you feel like you've run across a football field doing nothing, that's when you need to come back. And so that's sort of what we had in our mind. And so we took Tio into the hospital. He was there for maybe 3 days. And then my husband's breathing got worse. He started to have that feeling where he just could not breathe. And then he was in the hospital. And then it was Abuelo's turn. Then it was Grandpa's turn. And so it was a subsequent sort of path of our family being admitted into the hospital, navigating care on the outside, trying to make sure that we were talking with the nurses. As you guys have heard, there's no visits,
Right.
um, and so everything has to be through phone calls. And it was, even from the first time they were admitted through a few days later, you could see the stress and strain on the nursing and medical team in terms of the amount of time that they could give to us, because hospital beds were filling up. And this was on the early end. Like, friends had reached out and they said, you are the first family that we've known to have COVID here in Illinois. And so I want to say, right, in some sense, we were lucky in that sense, but at the same time, you never want to say you're lucky to have a serious virus. But, at the end of the day, it worked out. So I think one thing for my children, as they started seeing relatives go to the hospital, um, we just tried to keep things as normal as possible, considering that we had already been doing social distancing and my children have already been at home for a while. Um, and we would just explain, this is part of COVID. Papa's not feeling well. He needs help. He needs help getting his lungs to work better. Breathing is hard for him. And then we just answered any questions, that the kids had. They obviously noticed that people were wearing masks, so we talked about masks and what that does, to stop the virus, both for ourselves and to take care of other people. Um, but it also made me realize that there were certain things that I had assumed that the children had known, and it came out another way. For example, we had to quarantine my 5-year-old upstairs when he had a fever. And so it's very difficult to quarantine within a home, right? You've got this
Right.
bedroom sectioned off, and right. And I mean, I can completely empathize for families who don't have a lot of space. How do you do that? And luckily we're currently in a larger home, so we do have different areas where people can go. But I would say just try your best, if you can use disposable plates or silverware, which obviously it's not great for the environment, but when it comes down to our health, like, try not to bring dishes back into the sink if you have to, which is what we did. We filled the sink with vinegar and bleach and just made sure to, get all services as much as we could, wash our hands, cover our mouths, all the things that safety is recommending. But my we had to quarantine Santiago, he's my very active child. He does not stop. He could run around for 20 hours a day, and he does. And he said, "Mama," he said, "why do I have to stay upstairs?" And I said, "Well, sweetie," I said, "you have a fever." I said, "So just like Mom and Papa had to stay in the room for a while, you're going to stay upstairs." And so he was most excited about somebody bringing him food. He's like, "This means I get meals upstairs." I was like, "That's right, buddy. You do." But this, I don't want to say it was like a day or two later. He said, "Mama," so he said, "Why are we all in the house? Why are we all doing this?" And I thought we had already talked about it, but who knows? The last month and a half had been a blur, or you know what I mean? I don't know if there was a direct conversation, but I said, "Well, honey," I said, I said, "a lot of people have COVID-19." I said, "And we have COVID." He said, "We do?" And I said, yes, you have it too. And he said, I have COVID. And it made me realize, and this part is kind of hard, that this big scary virus, he didn't realize it was in him and that he had it, right? And so that's when it manifested in different ways. So the next time somebody came to the door, he pretended like he was a monster. He said, I have COVID, I'm going to give you my COVID. And when we still go for walks outside, he's over sort of the monster part, but he said, oh, make sure we're 6 feet apart because I have COVID. I said, you do, buddy. I said, we don't have symptoms anymore. I said, but everyone in the whole world right now is just being so very careful to take care of everyone. And what I realize is, and he's in a different place than some children because he's felt the symptoms. He's seen family members go to the hospital, and even within, I think, a loving, supportive home where we're talking about these things, children are still going to manifest in different ways. My 3-year-old who just turned 3 at the end of March, um, two quick anecdotals. We were playing with one of her little people houses, and there was somebody. We pretended someone was ringing the doorbell, right? And she pretended, I said, ding dong, can you let the friend in? And she said, nope. She said, the friends can't come over because we're all sick. She said, nobody can come in the house. I said, that's right. I said, but hopefully soon friends can come over. And then we talked about other ways where we can still see friends, because we've had friends drop off food and
Mhm.
just stop by the outside of our gate, open the doors, like many people are doing with the drive-by birthday parties and things like that. And even this morning, she was making breakfast in her play kitchen. I said, "Are you making breakfast?" And she said, "No." She said, "Big Bear is sick." She said, "Big Bear needs me to take care of him." And so the beautiful thing is, right, if we have our minds and ears open, depending on the age of our kiddos that we work with, right, we know that traumatic situations can come out during play, and it's a great opportunity then to get down and play with them or talk about it. And my 10-year-old, he has been he actually my father-in-law, abuelo, has had low blood pressure twice, and we don't know again if it's a result of COVID symptoms, but he's actually fainted twice. And my son was by himself and found him. He fell off the chair, and he was the one who had to sort of scream, abuelo, abuelo. And so we came running downstairs, and um, we've talked with Oliver sort of just about how he's feeling, and about what COVID, just what COVID means to him. And I've just really tried hard to be very patient, not
Mhm.
force him to talk, but just let him know, at any time he can talk about what's going on in his mind, or ask any questions. And um, so I think, sort of my overall arching advice with that is just honor kids, with developmentally appropriate language. Don't try to hide things from them because they notice. If my 3-year-old is, noticing that people are sick and can't come in, and we've talked about these things, I'm going to lean into that. If my 5-year-old is realize that COVID is in his body, I need to talk with him about that. And same thing with upper elementary and middle school kids. Allow them to write and color and draw, and be ready for these places where the expression, the trauma needs to be talked about and worked through in different ways.
Kate, thank you so much for sharing that. I I think you're providing so much insight, like the how we can use play, and positive play is a way to have students express and for kids to express. And this is interesting because, when we think about something like the meaningful closure of the school year, right? And we put it in
Yep.
perspective of this experience, many educators and superintendents and principals that I've talked to have said, I'm concerned that students will never feel that the school year has ended. They'll never be like, I'm done with fourth grade, or I graduated eighth grade, right? And that's
Hmm.
that's absolutely true. And that's a concern that's top of mind. But
Yeah.
then there's also, your children and children who've been impacted by COVID have a reality where the meaningful closure of the school year may not be the thing that's most top of mind, right?
Hmm.
Or it may be one of a list of things that are top of mind, a list of things that are shifting identity, and a list of things that they're now coping with and dealing with as 10-year-olds or 11-year-olds. And so if I'm an educator or a principal who's watching, and having worn both those hats yourself, how do we start to frame these conversations? Like, how do we talk about if your family's been impacted by COVID? Like, how do schools, if I was your principal, Kate, what would you have wanted me to do in this case? And then also, how can we frame the end of the school year for your children in a way that it is meaningful? Or is it kind of like, hey, school right now is here. We're, as a family, we're surviving because our reality is really hard just day to day. So like, how, if I'm a school leader listening, how can I support you? Or is that support something, like, tell us.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing I was thinking about last night, and just overall, right, in education is I think parents and educators sort of felt this. I mean, considering it's a tough time, and there is layers of trauma in lots of different ways. But from a lot of friends, I was seeing and hearing, and educator friends, sort of this breath of fresh air that I can just, be with my kids. Whether I have to, and again, right now I am excluding, our frontline workers, people that do need to be, in stores and in offices still, our essential workers still working. But this is more for, educators that are at home and they may have children and they may not, but just feeling like I have a second to breathe. I don't have to jump on a Zoom call 6 hours a day with my principal. I don't have to unpack the standards right now for my first grade classroom and figure out how to take our whole classroom and turn it into this virtual space. And then once it started, I think there's a lot of pride, right? A lot of supportive parents, a lot of teachers that are trying their best and feeling new successes in really interesting ways. But again, this is just me, and this is
Oh,
from my teacher perspective and my coach perspective and my principal perspective as well. Is there a way for us to just slow it down, continue to slow it down, because everybody needs some space and time. And so I think within that slowed space, if we can't, if we still are meeting with kids online and seeing the benefit with that and the necessity of it, is there some space to just also share with parents, here are the ways kids are already learning in their homes, or here are ideas of that. Here's math with, unloading the dishwasher or washing the dishes. Here's math with baking and cooking. Here's going on a walk and looking for signs of nature. Here's a COVID journal, where I'm getting my thoughts out, and I'm able to illustrate, this time in my life, as painful as it might be or as different as it might be. So I think just being really strategic with looking for resources that are child centered and teacher centered, is really important. And I know those definitions can mean a lot of things to different people, but for me, it's honoring the work that everyone is doing. I saw a really great meme the other day, for therapists and social workers. It's like we are helping internal trauma that's already existing now with all of this external trauma, right? That, I mean, again, and teachers and principals do that every day. So I don't know. I don't have a magic wand, but I'm just thinking about what resources can be shared around helping kids and adults understand that we as humans are learning. We're learning all the time. And if we can share ideas to help really understand that, we're going to, I think, reduce the stress. They were talking a lot about bring down your expectations during this time. You don't have to write a novel. You don't have to learn a new language, because we can all have that chaos that builds up inside, and it's like, hold on, we need to take care of ourselves if we're really gonna move forward.
mhm.
I don't know if that answers your question, but
No, it does. It does. It does. And I think, I'm gonna ask one more piece, and then we're gonna loop Kiljun in here. So when we think about the close of the school year,
yeah,
and we think of, and again, Kiljun, I'm gonna hop to you after we hear from Kate on this. So if I am your principal, Kate, I'm Oliver's teacher, I'm Oliver's principal, and I know that COVID has impacted your family. What would you want from me to make the end of the school year meaningful for your family? And then the larger piece around that is that, should that end of the school year be something that is celebrated and big and, hey, we made it? Would you want Oliver's teacher for fifth grade to write him a letter? Would you want someone to call Oliver on the phone? Like, call your family on the phone. What kind of supports would you need right now? Did you need then? And then moving toward the end of the school year, so it's marked in some way. It just doesn't roll into summer, right? Given the landscape of what your family's going through. And then Kiljun, to you as well, like, how can schools at a large scale meaningfully close out the school year, and then also look at things like diagnostics and data? We're fortunate that we know Kate. Kate's a friend, so we were able to hop on this call with Kate and get her to share her story. But so many families are experiencing this. So many families don't have Kate's expertise with social emotional learning, with trauma, with equity, so they can speak with us or provide resources. And so it's like, Kate, first off, what would you need from the school right now, and then thinking about the end of the year? And then Kiljun, for you, what should we be thinking about at a larger scale for schools when we look toward closing the year out? So Kate, what are your thoughts, hon? And I know that's a dissertation topic, but
Yeah, I think since I'm just sort of coming out of this space of we're all home, we're
yeah,
surviving, we're surviving, we've survived. But to be honest, I don't feel like I'm personally in a position yet of safety. And this is why. I think when COVID first hit, the idea was you get COVID, you're good. Like you built up immunity. Here we go. I just talked with a nurse 2 days ago because my parents really want to see the kids and I. They're out in Minnesota. It's been 7 months since we've seen them. I said, can we travel? I think just this idea that um, nobody knows. Nobody knows about antibodies. Nobody knows about what this virus brings next. And I've had a return of symptoms now twice. And so it's been very scary for me. So I think what I would appreciate is just probably just a general acknowledgement of like, how are you doing? A check in, um, you know, uh, and maybe just asking me what I need. And then sort of I would also lean into my 10-year-old and to just say, sort of what are you missing from school? What are you missing from your friends? What do you think that we can set up within the conditions and parameters that we have? I know that that's general, but what I will say is one of these most supportive communities that we have now been a part of was I had a friend at my son's school say, "What can we do for you? And she didn't just leave it as a general statement. She provided something specific. She said, "Can we set up a meal train?" I said, "That sounds good." And because of that, I have had so many people check in with me and stop by and bring us food. Or so many people have said, "You have a bunch of Grubhub cards. Let me bring you something homemade, or let me stop by the grocery store," which the outpouring of love and attention has completely overwhelmed me. I mean, truly, and we're still in the midst of feeling all that love and support. And so, what I'm doing now on a personal level for friends that have reached out and said, "I think Grandpa has COVID. My husband has COVID. He's at 104 temperature for 3 days." So I'm sort of doing this work, independently, reaching out to people because I've been sharing our story a lot. Is just suggest ask families what they need, but also suggest something specific. And then you'd be surprised at the team. I mean, we've had people donate to us that I don't know well at all in the school, but because somebody posted that on the Facebook school page, it's just been, an outpouring of love and support. And so many people have reached out and said, "Thank you for sharing the specifics of what's going on because you're informing, a lot of people." And so I think just checking in with families, offering specific supports, and then just tying that back into a school community. I was thinking about this last night that there's really no better time to open up the doors of a school without physically being in the school, right? Teachers are dropping off food and homework assignments for kids. And they're, here in McKinley Park, there was this big, beautiful parade where all the teachers got in a car and went around and celebrated their students. And so we were out on the front steps, even though it wasn't my school, we were out in the front steps cheering for all these teachers. And so just things like that, realizing that community is all around. And I think that's going to help on the other side when families go back to school, truly feeling welcome within school doors. And that's a big part of my personal work and ways that I've supported teachers and myself is just how do we expand what school means. So I know that's large and it's philosophical. You'll probably jump into that, Kiljun, as well, but that's all I can think of right now.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Kate. And I know that there's many friends that you have from the Mindful Praxis family who are watching now, and my phone is blowing up with people being like, "What's Kate's address? I want to bring her lasagna."
Well,
So more food is on it.
this is actually, and I'll try to keep this short. I'm sorry, there's so much packed in here, right? Um, is just I feel I'm very close to the place where I can now start to give back. And I truly mean that. Even just receiving all that we've received, I said, I need to now be the one who's starting to now reach out and see who is being affected by this virus, who is reaching out to me. What can I just jump on the way people jumped in for me? The very first day we shared our story, the next day I had an Instacart grocery delivery. Although don't do it today. Today's May 1st, right? We want to be thinking about workers' rights. Don't order today. But I had an Instacart full of, chicken noodle soup and cafe bustelo and all this stuff that a friend just said, I think this will help you on my doorstep. And again, this isn't even a close friend. This is just somebody who said, I think this family needs something. So it's like, I know that I'm very soon in this position to like give back. And truly, I mean, in very, I think, what might be insignificant ways for some people, but very significant for others because I've unpacked a lot of our privilege through this, which is very important work. But just the fact that, we were able to think about the hospitals we went to and everybody got sick at a different time and we've had space to navigate, this virus and working from home and keeping our kids healthy. And so I would just say also have schools come together and think about the ways in which they can truly uh, donate food and time and hours to people who need it um, even more. So,
Kate, you are giving back right now, my friend, by sharing this story with so many of us. You're such an inspiration and you're so amazingly strong. I just gotta send you love, babe, because
well,
you just
thank you, thank you. I just feel like this is an opportunity for people to truly, and you've seen it. You've seen it with people making masks and donations, and it really is. And I think that schools are central to what's happening, and it's really a time to, I think, reimagine what's possible. And I think the part about people jumping back on and having to do hours of online learning with kids is like there's some things that are very important and good about that consistency and seeing their teacher. But I also want to keep pushing the envelope just a little bit and saying, what else can learning look like where we can have kids at the center of, you know, just educators and parents truly following the lead of kids and wrapping kids into how can they start a community project for those that have been affected by COVID? What ways can they give to their community? Things like that. Child-led learning truly is an opportunity right now, physically and I guess structurally.
absolutely, absolutely. So kills you now, and I realize this is shifting a smidge because you're coming at us with some diagnostics and some numbers and some how we can take this amazing advice from Kate and then think about application on a large scale, right? So how do we do that? How do we do that? Oh, I can't hear you, hon. I think you're
And
muted. Oh, there you go.
oh, okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So what Kate shared and the work I've been doing for the past few weeks with school districts and child welfare agencies across the country, there's a huge lesson here, and that's sort of reflecting upon our normal practices and our cultural values, and there's a lot of uh, a glimpse of what we've seen here. Um, really makes us think about what we do on daily basis and how we approach our kids on educational practices and what we do at home, um, it, there were a lot of things that, at least for me, it made me think, wow, we should have been doing this anyway, but we waited until, something as tragic as, the spread of virus let us just think about being reflective. And I think school closure is one of those instances. And I've said this a number of times in the past, although I didn't think about it in this way. We often lose the sight of children's development as being this giant continuum. From the time they were born until, and our entire life is that learning spectrum, right? It is a continuum. Um, it's not as though, but we treat it in terms of practice as though we have a starting point and a stopping point, and then we do it over and over again. When children's development really doesn't work like that. And what I mean by that is, I think end of the school is always a great case to me. And in fact, if I can put my Tiger Mom's hat on, one of the things that I've always noticed, and I think this is very much Western culture, if you will, and that is there's this huge celebration of end of school, right? Which is great. I think the accomplishments need to be acknowledged, but there's very little reminder about this is just part of the process that you're going to get to the next step. In other words, there's a fall coming. There's after eighth grade, there is high school. After high school, there is other endeavors. There is no reminder of that when the break comes, and that's why empirically we have this summer learning loss, right? Part of that is because we have this sort of misconceived notion about what learning is, and you just completely drop the ball. And it should be like, I love Kate's the anecdote about doing the dishes, doing math, while doing the dishes. Those are the little moments that should continually occur. And I don't think we do enough of that. I think that's a huge reminder for all of us, is that, the saying goes that higher the leap, harder the ground. In other words, when you have all these massive celebrations about end of third grade, while that of in itself is hugely great, but what doesn't come into play is that the reminder of the fourth grade, right? I think we should do more of that in terms of thinking about that continuum. We should, and that's why I often, see this all the time whenever I'm out with my 4-year-old. Parents who let the children do something and then they're immediately on their phones. In other words, it makes me think they're doing something for their kids when their intention is really they want a break. They want something that's for themselves, not for the child. I think all those things are something reminders of our practice. I think if you're going to do something with your child, it has to be meaningful for all those that are in it. If you need to take a break from that, you take a break in a genuine manner that's not damaging to one another. I don't think we think of those things when we live our daily lives. I mean, I'm certainly guilty of that myself, but I think all these instances that are magnified right now because we're so intensely close and we're dealing with all these really intense issues. It really makes me think about how much we took certain actions for granted, or how much we put emphasis on certain events that are really part of the process. And I think it's really time for us to think about all that. Um, if we're a little more even keel about all of our lives without huge ups and downs, I think we can do things much better. In fact, I have a cousin who's dealing with COVID right now, and he's in the hospital. And one of the things that we were able to do, because we have this regular, well, now it's a Zoom meeting, but we've been doing FaceTime anyway. One of the things we've been able to do is rotate reading to his kids. So he has a 1-year-old up to 6-year-old, and so one of the things that we've been able to do is to use those times, and we even taught how to get 6-year-old to read to a 1-year-old, so the mom can go take a nap for 10 minutes if she wants to. So all those things that led me to think, well, I think teaching 6-year-old to take care of a 1-year-old, I think we should have started that before. We didn't think about those things. So there are a lot of really good reminders here. I think as tragic as this has been for many of us, I think if we take away some of the reflective concepts from here, and if we do things differently, and in the fall, and moving forward for next few years, we're gonna have to do things differently, particularly in education. I think this really has come to a point where, in fact, in my world, we've been talking about this a lot. A lot of people have said, well, the world of assessment is dead because it doesn't make sense, to us anymore. I don't think that's true at all. In fact, the world of assessment is important, but how we use assessment has to change. All these standardized tests were originally meant to be used for diagnostics, determining strengths and weaknesses of our children. But we came to use it for other things that were really not built for accountability and evaluation. All these things were not meant to be measured by these assessments. But we've been really pushing that boundaries a little bit. And it's time to be reflective. It's time to think about how we use that information for the betterment of our children and not for something else. And I think these are all part of the lessons that I certainly hope that we take away with, not just go back to what it was before.
Absolutely. And I love the thoughts that are being shared today, because quite frankly, these aren't the mainstream thoughts that we're gonna. And I love that we're saying, hey, listen, everybody, there's an opportunity here. This is really scary and exceptionally hard, but there's an opportunity here. So I want to make sure that I root us in some of the questions that were submitted, because folks took the time. And then I'm also going to introduce Rob in a second, because we're going to talk about student voice. And so, Kate, you definitely shared, and thank you so much, some insights for folks about what happens when a family is impacted by COVID. And I want to make sure there's some people that have joined us a little bit later. And I want to make sure, if you missed it, Kate was saying just the importance of using play to help students process, using stories. Kiljun saying like, hey, hop on and let's read stories. And I think that what might be helpful too is potentially, if you're an administrator or you're a social worker who's with us, or a teacher, emailing parents or calling parents and giving them some questions to ask their children during play. Like, hey, like letting the play happen. But Kate, as you said, like you didn't guide it. You didn't sit down and say like, okay, Oliver, tell me what, you were like, you're let that happen at your children's like own time frame, when they were ready to share, when they were comfortable. And I think that that's huge. Another piece, as Kiljun was mentioning, was the reading, and even potentially reading books that are around social emotional learning, reading books like It's Okay, Worries Are Not Forever, right? I know that Michelle Obama recently read The Gruffalo, which is great because there's some fear there, and about how do we harness fear and how do we process fear, right? And then Kate, we're thinking about like what schools and families can do. I love just saying like, hey, just rally. Call and ask me what I need, and rally. And Kiljun, it sounds like that's the same. Like, hey, we need to get creative around how we're supporting families, whether they're our own or whether they're part of our school community. And if somebody says, can you just get on the phone or get on a Zoom chat and read to my child so I can make dinner or I can have a nap? I think these are things that might not occur to folks because they might be thinking, oh, we've got to do something here, right? And I think what I'm hearing you say, although correct me, is let's focus on voice. Like ask people what they need. Is that part of it, do you think, Kate?
Yeah, and I think honestly, recentering kids. Kids are brilliant and they're amazing. And if we can help show families and teachers to step back and just ask some questions and just watch, kids are going to show us what they need. It's the same as adults, right? We find things we're interested, we learn all the time, and the research is clear on that. I'm a huge fan of nature learning, and again, and I know that again, dependent on the neighborhood, and there's all sorts of factors, but if you there's so many great things online too, like tours of of national parks, and just ways that we can also just integrate children's interests, because they'll show us. They will absolutely show us. So just try to step back and watch the magic happen.
I love that. I love that. And so, Kildren, I want to get back to something that you mentioned about with your tiger mom hat on, about us maybe overthinking, although these aren't your words, this meaningful closure piece, right? I was
Mm-hmm.
talking to a third grade teacher, I think it was third grade, and she was very stressed about her, she said, well, these poor students are never going to learn their 12 by 12 multiplication tables. She's like, we stopped at 7. And they're never going to learn 12 by 12, and they're going to go into the year and they're going to have this deficiency. And and she was really, and this is coming from like a genuine, you could tell she loved teaching place. She had her curriculum map done, 2 years ago. And I said to her, I feel you and I get it, because I was a teacher too with my standards on the board. I mean, I'm right there. But I'm like, they don't necessarily know that, right? In the way that, sure,
Right.
they know that multiplication tables go up to 12, absolutely, and they know that was on the horizon to learn, but they're not sitting there with a deficit mindset, waking up every morning being like, oh, I'll never get into Harvard now because I missed that 12 by 12 multiplication. The teacher is stressing about that. So I think there's some projection that's happening about our worry as educators, right? About making this meaningful, making this, and please know, I'm not saying it's not important, but I'm also saying we have to balance our own projection. And I feel like the way to do that, which is why Rob is going to join us, and Kate, you talked about this, is more voice from all the players in a school community, right? Typically, school voice has meant, let's grab the 3 honor roll kids and, have the school board interview them. Look, that's not authentic voice. So to think about what meaningful closure should look like, because we have such a diverse audience of viewers with us, can we talk about voice, parent voice of disenfranchised populations within our school community that for whatever reason may or may not have had a seat on the table? As you know, I'm very big on paraprofessionals and teaching assistants and SPED professionals that are often those frontline folks, security guards in a school setting. So our students that may be disconnected academically, they might have a student here. They might have that meaningful relationship with a student. So Kildren, can we talk about that a little bit? And then I want to get Rob here so you guys can talk a little bit about your work with student voice and class catalyst. But how can we use student voice, parent voice to frame this end of year, this meaningful closure for us, versus being like, there has to be fireworks, there has to be, we've got to think of spending all types of money to be like, third grade's over, not really sure what fourth grade's going to look like yet. It could be one of 4 scenarios, everybody, but hang tight, right? Like, how do we do this?
So can I add one more voice to that?
Please.
That I think is hugely missing?
Please.
And that is the teacher's voice, right? And
Yes.
Carla, what you just said about the teachers, third grade teachers, and anxiety about missing instruction.
Right.
I feel like those of us in education that are supporting teachers, we put them there. We created anxiety. We created that almost like a sense of insecurity for the teachers. I think that's a huge problem, and then that's something that we need to address collectively. One of the reasons why I'm really feeling that is one of the most important elements is because under normal circumstances, quote unquote normal circumstances, teachers are more than capable of catching up on instruction. I have no doubt about that. The reason why we created that anxiety is because we have this sort of strange target about what ought to be that's measured with our students, when we know that children's development doesn't necessarily occur in a uniform fashion. The pace is different, language and skill acquisitions are different. We very seldom acknowledge that, but we put teachers in this box where everything at the multiplication has to occur before third grade. The
Yeah.
the decimals have to. Well, to a degree, those are reference points in which what normal pace looks like, but we turned it into a prerequisite to what is to come. It's actually it doesn't work that way. Our brain doesn't work that way. So for us to impose those kinds of rule instead of guidelines, I think it's where we create those anxieties for the teachers. That is that makes the problem even worse, right? And I think that's where the problem is. And again, I also talked about sort of parental errors, right, at which all of us make. But I think also because of all the structural issues that teachers face, we also have a false expectations. Us, the parents, have false expectations from the teachers about what ought to occur. That's
Right.
why this communal concept is really important. I think we really need to have. In fact, in past 5 years, I've done probably at least 24 talks to parents about assessment because parents really don't know what it is, and that's sometimes it's astounding to me. The parents themselves don't know what children, what teachers use to measure progress of their children. I There are gaping holes here. Again, this is one of those learning moments that I hope we change in terms of our practice. Is what it means to be communal means that we all understand what children go through from similar lenses, so that we can collectively groom them together, not pieces and pieces in silo, which is exactly what's happening right now.
Oh, absolutely. And I know, Kildren and I are doing work with school districts around crafting their recovery and reentry plans with our colleague Allison Slade. And some of the conversations we're having, they're saying, well, what about student social emotional learning needs? And we're saying, hey, listen, we need to solve for knowing what those social emotional learning needs are first. Because right now there's so much projection happening. There's so much, like, first out of the box, we've got to say, how do we authentically gather student social emotional learning needs? Because there's families who have been impacted by COVID who have not. There's students that were tier 2 and tier 3 prior to COVID that didn't receive service during this time. Kildren, as you were mentioning with your work in the foster care field, domestic violence has gone up. There's concerns there. And so we can't just, as we have in the past, assume students' need. Instead, we have to authentically assess it. And Kildren, as you mentioned, also teacher need and teacher voice, which teacher well-being has been something that is always the last item on the agenda. Oh, look, we put in a salad bar. There's a yoga class on Friday. Y'all feel better, right? And now we're actually can have an authentic conversation around teacher voice, student voice, parent voice, making sure folks are at the table. And so if I'm an administrator listening to this now, I'm saying, okay, you guys, this is great. And I'm in for 18 months from now, but right now when my school's closing in 30 days, right? How do I mark that end of the year? How do I making it meaningful? I'm on board with everything you're saying, but how do I make that end of the year meaningful? Right? Without putting too much pressure on the following year, right? So how do I make it meaningful, and how can there be equity in that delivery? Right? Because this is difficult. Not all families have screens. Not all families have access to resources. As Kate said, there's layers of privilege in this conversation that are just starting to emerge in some circles. So how do we do this?
Well, in many ways, and that's why I don't know that we think of it as closure, right? I mean, yes, the
Okay.
school year is closing, the new budget cycle starts, and this is part of the continuum. I think if you're a leader in a district or a school, I think you need to remind the parents and the staff that this summer is going to be incredibly important. You know, it's not so much that we're going to take time off and come back and try to regroup in third week of August, but we need to do some work. We need to be reflective over the summer about what it means to do our work now, because you know, it just is very much like a performance, right? Just because
Right.
you're gonna perform in September doesn't mean you're gonna start practicing at the end of August. It's something that you need to start thinking about it now. You need to start thinking about how we're gonna change, how we're gonna do this, regardless of format, right? Because right now there's a lot of discussions about hybrid
Yeah.
model where students spend less time at school, and perhaps balance with the remote learning. And you know, there's a lot of conversations about how to balance that. All those things really won't occur without a thoughtful implementation of what you're going to do. And to do that, I think a lot of leaders have to think about how to get your staff ready. And Carly, you're right. I mean, it's not just the teachers. It's everybody from security guard, it's janitors. Everyone has to think on the same page. We really have to think about um, this public health issue, but also what it means to make children feel safe when they're at school, what it means for them to be in classroom. How do we get them to focus for 45 minutes at a time?
Right.
All those things really need to be thought of. And that's going to be the work. And I certainly think it's doable. It's just that we can't start that conversation in August. We have to start having that conversation now, so that we can gather information. We can start thinking about different scenarios. All those things has to start now.
Right. And so I think to close, I'm gonna scooch my chair over here and I'm gonna have Rob join us because Kate and Kiljun, you have both been huge in the development of our certification program. You know the content well, and also huge in the development and the rollout of Class Catalyst. And I want to bring Rob in because I want you to talk a little bit, the three of you, about the diagnostic data and some of the semantic now, like what you're hearing and around the power of student voice. And the reason that I want to close with this is I feel like, again, so often we have said, and Kiljun, I know that, you know, you and I have talked about this at length, like, oh, we capture student voice. And then we're like, how are you really authentically capturing student voice? And I think that that's a mechanism that is really, we've seen in this moment, it's really broken in the current educational system. We're not really capturing authentic student voice, authentic parent voice, teacher voice, stakeholder voice at large. And so I want the three of you to close, to talk, to give, if we're saying that meaningful closure is dependent upon capturing voice, you three have amazing insight on doing that through the work, of course, with the CERT and Class Catalyst. So what tips can you share for folks around, like, this is how we reach out, this is how we capture student voice, teacher voice authentically? Because if that's what we're saying, meaningful closure is dependent upon it being meaningful for everyone, right? Per definition, we've got to find out what that is. And then we also, as Kiljun's saying, we need to paint a realistic picture about the fall, right? What if we go back to school, we're there, and then 6 weeks later, we're gone again? We've got to make sure that student voice is consistent. We don't want to lose it once we've started to capture and build those relationships.
So to just take that from a platform standpoint,
right?
Class Catalyst is a platform for students to connect with both themselves and the teacher. And by building that as a routine, we're helping to build that voice. We've seen in the data, 30% of kids are entering a note of some sort. So they're connecting with their teachers. And about 10% of those, if I recall correctly, is tactical changes, like requests to change their seat. So with that platform, you're giving kids the opportunity to reach out to you. And kids are requesting teachers, hey, did you see the note I gave you? So it's building that connection with those teachers. And by building that routine into your school, you're telling kids, it's okay, we want to hear from you.
Right. So you're telling schools right now, if they make this effort with capturing student voice, 30% of the students will respond, and they'll respond with tactical solutions. So to Kate's point, like tactical being like, this is what I need today, right? Even if I can't express feelings,
Yep.
right? This is what I need today. Now, Kate, what do we say to folks who are like, I do want to capture student voice and teacher voice, but I'm also not a trained social worker, and my trained social worker or my trauma therapist or my school psych is swamped right now meeting the needs. So there's almost this willing suspension of disbelief. Like I don't want to capture voice because I don't know how to support that voice when I capture it. What do we say to that?
I can jump in real quick. I
Yeah,
think there's a lot there. One thing I'll say is I'm a huge fan of workshop within the classroom, right? So workshopping spaces allows teachers to conference with kids, right? Meet in small groups, collect as much data as you can, confer with individual kids, whether that be a math workshop or writer's workshop or reader's workshop. You're bringing in structures that allow you to talk to children and hear them and just listen to them, whether it be looking at their journal entry or seeing where they are with math. And so just like Class Catalyst, right? It's the tool, right? The check-in is the tool to then allow further conversation and further connection, because learning happens in connection. And so I will just say, keep thinking about ways that we can help teachers structure their classrooms or restructure classrooms where you're truly listening to kids, and kids understand that they are going to have a time, if not every single day, a few times a week to connect with their teacher and share with them, whether it be something focused on academics, or they're ready right to jump in and say, I've had a really tough week, here's what's going on. So yeah, that's what I would say for right now.
Awesome. Thank you, Kate. And Kiljan, we're almost out of time here. So anything to add? Because I know that you're an advocate for voice, and I know that you feel like that's been a missing piece for a long time in education. But there is that fear, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to know.
I think we need to raise the awareness across the board. And in fact, borrowing an example from child welfare side, when we look at the investigation side of things in child welfare, a lot of times parents or any adults that deal with children, sometimes they get called out for abuse and neglect, and they don't know that what they were doing is abuse and neglect, and that happens a lot. We need to be really mindful of. We need to train people to think about how to deal with children. Kids are surprisingly observant and resilient, and they will tell you things that are totally unexpected from adult standpoint of view. And that's why, we cannot assume the kids are always, the individuals to talk down, or always are in learning mode, or, they're not always the little kids that we think they are. They show a surprising amount of intelligence. But we need to be mindful of that. But at the same time, all kids are emotionally, intellectually vulnerable, and we also need to be mindful of that. I don't think we adults don't enough of those things. So if you kind of look at, and this is why the voice of youth in general really doesn't resonate, because adults, we create these structures for the youth voice to be very superficial.
Right.
Give them a seat in a meeting. You can sit there, but don't talk, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I have to say, CPS does that. They have a representative from every high school, but when they go to adult meetings, they're not allowed to talk. Those kinds of things are really meaningless. We need to have a meaningful channel of communication with our kids, any outlet possible. And to do that, adults really need to be trained. I mean, I wish there were more professionals like counselors and social workers involved in curriculum development as a whole, because right now, so many things are just fragmented. So if you're a problem child, you have a behavior issue, you go see a counselor, right? I mean, if you outwardly express issues, that's when you go see a counselor. I don't know that every kid knows that they have access to a counselor. I mean, there's a lot of issues that we need to resolve so that all these emotional elements of our children, number one, can be articulated. Number two, addressed properly. I think that those are sort of missing elements right now.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for sharing. I know that there are so many more questions that are coming in, and I love it. So I think that what we'll do is we'll take some of these questions and we'll parlay them to next Friday's town hall. So please join us. Before we close, I want to make sure that we do a little wrap up. And so what we're saying here today is that meaningful closure is largely dependent upon student voice. And reaching out to families who've been touched by COVID is largely, again, dependent upon the voice of that family so they can articulate the support that they need. We know that many of these mechanisms weren't in play prior to COVID. Some of our schools might have had a phone tree. There may be Zoom calls set up, et cetera. Rob, I do know that you have made Class Catalyst available for free right now.
Yes.
And I want to make sure that if I'm an educator who does want to capture student voice and has zero money left in the budget, which many of us have, you did make this tool available for free. If I want Class Catalyst for teachers, for families, how do I access it for free?
Yeah, so we made a version of Class Catalyst called Class Catalyst Cares. If you just go to classcatalyst.cares.com, you will see information on that. The idea there was, as Carla said, to give the power to the teachers to connect with their students, and actually to parents as well to connect with their kids, because this is a new world. They're all of a sudden have their kids 24/7, and they're in charge of both the education and their well-being. And so the idea of Class Catalyst Cares is you as an individual can sign up, add your students, your kiddos, and then be able to have them check in and build that connection. The big difference between Skype meetings or Zoom calls is generally these are great to have some visuals, but you're doing them as a group, right? And so the ability to open up isn't there. Class Catalyst is a very individualized session. So when the kid is writing you, telling you how they feel, they're telling you how they feel, and you and only you. The other students are telling you and only you. So there's not this group session. There's not this fear that, if I write it in the chat or I say it live, it's going to be recorded and, show up on Instagram tomorrow. So it's a very private and systematic way to connect with your kids. Not only that, it also provides practices based on what those kids are needing. So again, these kids are in places where you don't have the ability to teach them hands-on, to realize they're having issues, or can't do the practices to help them get more mindful. Within the tools, there's directions and suggestions for practices based on their current needs.
Like doodling or mindfulness or that type of thing.
Exactly. And so you can't expect the parent or the kid remotely to be able to figure out which they need. The tool is helping them with that as well.
Right, because we can't ask parents or teachers to be social workers right now, right? To have all these amazing skills. And so let's close again with that website is classcatalyst.cares.com, and we'll close with a little centering breath. I would like to make this centering breath around gratitude to our panelists. Again, just the bravery of speaking honestly about your experiences. We're so grateful to you. And if you'd like to reach Kate or Kildren, please feel free to email me directly. And if you have any questions or comments, we're here to serve. We want to make these town halls for free available to anyone who'd like to join. And please send us questions. My email is Carla, CARLA.P@classcatalyst.com. That's Carla, CARLA.P@classcatalyst.com. So we'll close with a little centering breath, feet flat on the floor. Pausing, inhaling, and just throwing a little breath, exhaling a breath of gratitude to Kate, to Kildren, to anyone in your life right now who just might need a little bit of support. Thank you all so much. We're honored to be with you today, honored to serve. Thank you. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Kildren.
Thank you.